everyone was giving me so much advice and telling me not to stress. And it takes everyone a long time to learn their trade. Like I said about my paintings back in the early days, everyone improves, thank God we do. You have to start somewhere. Having those opportunities, that's what life's all about. I'm so grateful that I'm not behind the same desk every day doing the same thing. And of course it's a risk. Of course you don't know where your next paycheck's coming in from. There are some months where I really struggle and think, oh my God, this is tough.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick. And greetings to all of you listening from places like Washington, D.C., Lincoln, Nebraska, Walnut Creek, California, Bogota, Colombia, Punjab, India, and Palma de Mallorca, Spain. And wherever you're listening, I hope you've got a good car community and you can get out on the road with others and drive your classic, your hot rod, muscle car, pickup truck, or whatever happens to be in your garage. And the next time you're out there with other gearheads, I want you to share the show. Let them know this is a different kind of automotive podcast. Don't forget to check out the Horsepower Heritage YouTube channel. Lots of great content over there as well. And got a couple more videos coming in the next few weeks. And if you enjoy the show, please consider supporting it with a donation of $2, $10, or whatever amount you like. And that's really easy. You just go over to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage. You can make it a one-time thing or a monthly contribution, and that's much appreciated. All right, now that we've got the housekeeping out of the way, let me tell you about today's guest. Anna-Louise Felstead is a classically trained artist who sort of accidentally fell into the car world, and she's never looked back. Now, I'm not an art critic or anything, but if I had to describe it, I'd say her art is breezy and cheerful, almost impressionist, but it's definitely a different style than you may have seen before, at least when it comes to automotive art. And the other really cool thing is that Anna-Louise often does her work live at car events, which is exactly how I met her at this year's Pebble Beach Concours. She also mentioned in this interview what she calls her naughty car paintings, which is something I did not know about. Slightly risque territory. So I wanted to let you know ahead of time, just in case you listen with your kids in the car or whatever. And that's toward the end of the episode. Anyway, there's lots more to it, and I think you'll enjoy hearing all of these stories coming up right after this. This episode of Horsepower Heritage is sponsored by Model Citizen Diecast. No matter what's in your garage, you can fit all your automotive heroes on a shelf. And they've got you covered, whether it's 1/43rd scale, 1/18th scale, or even the ginormous 1/8 scale masterpieces from the Amalgam Collection. Go to modelcitizendiecast.com and get 10% off when you use the promo code HERITAGE at checkout. Limitations apply. From race cars to street cars and everything in between, it's Model Citizen Diecast, because your inner child still wants to play with cars. And now my interview with Anna-Louise Felstead, right here on Horsepower Heritage. Anna-Louise Felstead, thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You know, we caught up with each other at Pebble Beach this year, and you were painting. I think you were painting
the Duesenberg, the winning car. That's right.
Yeah, and great to meet you there. And of course, you're doing plein air painting in the middle of this amazing world-class car show, and people are coming at you, talking to you from every direction. And I don't know how you were getting any work done, but anyway, the painting was fantastic. And I said, I've got to have her on the show.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of used to it now. I've been doing it painting cars since 2008. And I was before then painting lots of things on location. I did stuff with the Royal Navy, painting their Harrier jump jets and their helicopters and their ships. So from quite an early start, I was used to being out and about painting and people looking over my shoulder, which was quite nerve-wracking to begin with. But with time, I've learned to just be relaxed, and I don't mind people talking to me because I can still work and talk at the same time. It's just, as you know, Pebble can get very, very crowded, and a lot of people are just staring at the car, and often, even though they actually look at me painting, they still stand in front of me and just carry on their conversation. Luckily, there are people that will just gently go up to them and ask them to move to the side a little bit. So it's I have helpers.
Yeah, that's terrific. And actually, I think that was one of the questions that I asked you when we met was, how do you manage to get any work done with all the people in front. And describe how you do that, because it would throw me off completely.
Well, I guess first of all, I just find a position in front of the car that hopefully isn't going to get in anyone's way, but as is often the case with various concours events or racing events, cars have to move occasionally either to collect an award, and that happened to me at the Quail event. On the Friday, I was halfway through painting what also happened to be the winning D-Type Jaguar of the show, so I was lucky on two fronts this year. The car left to collect its award, so I just take photographs, but when I'm actually at Pebble or any of these events, I just get a position that I like, normally a 3/4 length version sort of angle, and set up my chair and my paints next to me, my little portfolio, and then I just do the pencil sketch, which doesn't take me that long now. I mean, I've been doing it long enough to sort of get that kind of angle down quite quickly, and then it's just a matter of colouring it in, really. And it's quite difficult sometimes with black cars because I don't want to create a painting that's flat. I don't use flat colour. I also like to capture the energy and the atmosphere of the event. And I'm an artist, so I'm putting in my own identity, I suppose, and a bit of my own self, rather than just trying to create a photographic representation. That's not my interest. I don't want to do that. I feel like if you want to do that, just take a picture. Although I think that it's fantastic that people can do that. It shows huge skill. That's not really what my thing is. I don't want to do that. So that's why I love painting live, because you can so often see people walking past, especially at events like Pebble. You've got these wonderfully dressed people, women with fabulous hats, maybe carrying a dog in a little mini car with a Gucci jacket on. I mean, there's just so many fabulous things to see. And although that lady might take 2 seconds to walk past me, I've seen her, so I can capture her, and I can, embellish or subtract. A painting is always editing. You're sort of seeing things that you want to see and maybe taking certain things out. Which, of course, as you know, you can't do in a picture. Some photographers spend much longer than me trying to get the perfect shot, but I'm lucky that I can just edit according to my will, really.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And, you can get some period inspiration, too, because people are often in costume. I imagine that Goodwood that's the ultimate, right?
It really is. It's amazing there. Have you been?
I haven't yet. Hopefully next year.
Okay. Well, I was there this year. I used to paint there a lot. But I've found now over the years that I've figured out the best events for me to paint at. And Goodwood, although we had fantastic weather this year, it hasn't always been the case. It often is, but I tend to kind of paint at my events in the States and in Monaco during the Historic Grand Prix, which is also a fabulous backdrop of architecture. But definitely Goodwood, for costumes, and the atmosphere is insane. It's fantastic. But a lot of the cars are racing, so that's the problem for me, because when the cars are racing the whole time, you've always got mechanics opening the bonnet, changing the tyres. They're out for scrutineering, they're out for practice, qualifying and racing. It's very difficult, and you obviously get so many crowds as well. And I'm often in the way. So over the years, I've realised that concours events are actually much better for me to paint at.
Right. By the way, have you been to LeMans Classic?
I have a few times. I've been asked to race there next year in a pre-war Bentley. But that does mean getting my racing license back again, which I let expire. So we shall see.
Wow. I can't wait to talk to you a little bit about the racing, but let's go back, because you've been drawing and painting since you were a little girl, right? It was a very early obsession of yours.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. My dad used to come back from the office. He worked in IT and computer software. And I think he was always, he loved art. He was never encouraged to do it, really. But he had an eye, and I think he saw very quickly that I did as well. And so he'd come back from the office with these diaries where you just have a blank page and the date at the top. And he'd just give them to me, and I would spend hours in my bedroom just filling them up with drawings from my imagination, which I think often children do. And I would also write long stories. I think when I was about 5 or 6, I wrote my own version of Gulliver's Travels, and it was about 28 pages long, which the poor teachers had to read. But at that time, I was very creative, and I always loved to draw, and it was always something that I knew I wanted to pursue, really. And he encouraged that, which was great.
And so you went to art school, am I right? And quite a prestigious art school.
Yes, I went to Central St Martin's in London, which is quite famous. A lot of also because of the Jarvis Cocker song. which mentions St Martin's, and also the Royal College of Art as well. I did my Master of Arts there, which is a 2-year course. So all in all, after doing my A-levels, it was a year's foundation in Brighton, a 3-year degree at St Martin's, and then a 2-year MA, so 6 years in total after school.
And your big break is kind of a strange one, an unlikely one, the Royal Navy.
Yes, that was a self-initiated project, but it started from having a conversation with one of my tutors at St Martin's and being uncomfortable with the fact that I didn't feel good at painting things like I used to from my imagination as a child. Every kid draws from their imagination. But as I got older, I didn't like doing that as much. I liked to draw things that were actually physically in front of me. And because I just like looking at objects, I'm interested in architecture, I'm interested in people, mechanical objects as well. And a teacher took me to one side and said, listen, don't worry about this, because there are plenty of artists making a career for themselves by what he described as reportage artwork. So you're basically reporting what you see with images as opposed to words, like a journalist would. So he showed me the work of a few artists, one of whom is called Lucinda, I'm trying to remember her, so I think it's Lucinda Miller. I might get that wrong, but the other one who is very well known is Linda Kitson, who was chosen as the official Falklands War artist. Now, I did a dissertation on war illustration compared to war photography. So I was looking at artists like Don McCullin and Philip Jones Griffiths and Margaret Thatcher, apparently, after Vietnam, when there was so much bad publicity and propaganda and press, that, we were seeing so much. They wanted to stop that happening during the Falklands War. So rather than sending out photographers, they wanted to send an artist out instead. So they sent out Linda Kitson, who I met. She was very good to me, and she's still creating beautiful pieces to this day. But I was fascinated by her charcoal drawings of, helicopters and ships at sea and guys with the ammunition. And I just found that so fascinating. And as it happened, my cousin married a captain of a submarine in the Royal Navy back when I was at art college. And when I went to the wedding, I sat next to a captain of a submarine, another captain. And I said how much I love Linda Kitson's work and how I'd love to get on a submarine and paint. And he said, well, you'll never get on a submarine because you're female and you're a civvy. He said, but what I could possibly manage is getting you on a Type 22 frigate with the Royal Navy. So the next thing is I get a phone call. I can't remember where it was from, probably Plymouth or Portsmouth. I think it was Plymouth, inviting me on to HMS Cornwall for a week at sea. And that's where it all started. And I went down there on my own on a Sunday night, went straight to the officers' mess where I was greeted and bought lots of gin and tonics. And the next day I got up very early. I was sleeping in the chaplain's cabin. And you've got all these strange noises. And anyway, the ship set sail first thing on Monday morning, and they loaded ammunition in the Solent. And it was the most terrifying thing I think I'd ever done, because I realised that I was suddenly stuck on this ship for a week with all these people in uniform and shouting at me because I was getting very keen to sort of start painting. I was in all these different areas wanting to create this new work. But I was in places that were... I wasn't allowed to be because of health and safety or because of privacy. I was shouted at a lot on that first day, and I remember almost being in tears, thinking, "What have I done?" But actually, it started the most amazing experience with the Navy, and I was invited back for many years after that, and had some fantastic experiences.
Wow! So that week-long cruise, where did you guys go? Did you go into the Med, or did you kind of stay towards the West Country, or?
We were in the North Sea. I think we went up there, and it was literally a whole week of lots of different exercises, like man overboard exercises, fire exercises, shooting ammunition from the 4.5 gun. It was full on, and
rough seas.
It was quite rough. I have been sick before on smaller boats, but this was a different thing. I mean, you're on a huge boat, and it was moving around a lot, and they would just say you need to eat. And you need to lie in your cabin and I took seasick pills, but eventually, the seas did calm down. But it was just more of it's such a completely alien experience. You're climbing up and down ladders every day. You're in effectively a big sort of aluminium tube or steel. I don't know what it's made of. I should know that. But yeah, you're just in this sort of big metal box, and all these people running around you, and you've got the ops room. and you've got the navigator on the bridge sort of looking over maps, and you've got the captain. And I had dinner with the captain one evening, which was, interesting. And then the next night I was having dinner down in one of the messes, 3 Hotel Alpha, I remember. And all the lads, they weren't allowed to store their drinks, but they kind of do. So they're given, I think, allowed to have 2 or 3 cans of beer a night, but they would save them. And then on the Friday night, they'd drink them all. I had a very fun evening where I was sent down to 3 Hotel Alpha with the XO of the ship on captain's orders to sort of take care of me. And it was, I took a mini disc player and was recording. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. Crazy.
Wow. Yeah. And I can't imagine painting in that environment. Obviously, first of all, it's moving. Second of all, it's not exactly a comfortable place. Everything is steel plate. And
I was capturing as much as I could. And I didn't realize really, there's not just one important person. Obviously, the captain is important, but every single person on that ship has a role to play and they're important. And if they fail, that has a huge knock-on effect on everybody else. So it's a huge family, really. And it's interesting because I often think of the classic car world as a huge sort of family, like a traveling circus. I had a bit of a presenting experience for Formula One management many years later in 2014 for the Singapore World Championship. And it was a world that I wasn't really used to because I had been for a long time in the classic car industry, going around all these concours events and classic races. And then suddenly to be launched into the F1 world, it was a different thing. But they're all quite male dominated, as you know. And there's a lot of camaraderie and a lot of passion. All these people have a huge common interest. And it's a teamwork, it's a team effort. A lot more so probably in Formula One because and the Navy, because they've all got to achieve one goal, and that is to win. The classic car world is different, but of course, all these guys want to win their races. All these guys who have their cars on the lawn want to win the concours event. So it is all about team and it's about passion. And what I love about it is you can get someone quite senior in the car world who, I don't know, has a huge car collection, but they can be having a really in-depth conversation with a huge mutual respect with a mechanic that knows a lot about the history of a car. And I love that about, there's no hierarchy in a way. I guess there is in other ways, but the bottom line is there is such a common interest and a passion, and that's what I get excited by.
What was your entree to the car world? Because that's quite niche.
Yeah, and I think it's because I was doing so much stuff for the Royal Navy, and then they kept inviting me to different things, and I had flights in Harriers, and a flight in a Harrier, I should say. And I quickly realized, although I loved painting this stuff, they were quite difficult to sell. A lot of the guys who wanted to buy my work, their wives or their girlfriends didn't necessarily want another picture of a Harrier jump jet on their wall. And I get that, and I sometimes have that in the car world too. But I think it started really because I was out one night in London with a boyfriend, and he introduced me to his friend, James Wood, who happened to race classic cars for a living, basically. And James, we just got chatting, and he asked me what I did, and I told him. He said, "Oh, you should paint classic cars. I'm racing in Monaco in a few weeks' time." And I was like, "Oh, he's just sending me all these pictures of himself racing in Monaco." And I thought he was showing off a bit. And I thought, I can't afford to go to Monaco and stay in a fancy hotel and paint cars. I just didn't really think about it. And then interestingly, quite soon after that conversation, one of my brother's friends was flying out to Monaco for the F1 Grand Prix, and asked me if I would go there and donate a painting that was going to be auctioned off on a yacht, super yacht. And I jumped at the chance, but said to James, "Oh my God, I've just been offered this opportunity to go and paint F1." And James laughed and said, "You won't get close to any of the F1 cars." As I said, AL, if you want to paint cars, come to the Historic, which is 2 weeks before the F1, I think. I can't remember which way around it is. I think it's the F1 first and then the Historic. But anyway, regardless, I went to both. And they were two very different animals, and I couldn't get close to any of the F1 cars, as James had said. But when I went with James, he, bless him, he introduced me to everybody in the paddock. Access was a lot more accessible. It's easier to get into the paddock and easier to talk to the drivers. And yeah, it basically started from there. And within, I think the first day I sat down and started painting a BRM or a Ferrari. There were a few cars I painted. And then the next thing is I was being tapped on the shoulder and asked what I charged and how much would I have time to go and paint someone's Formula Junior Stanguellini? Would I paint somebody else's car? And it just went from there. And then shortly after that, someone said, "Are you coming to Monza, in a couple of weeks?" I was like, "What's Monza?" And then I went to Monza, and then I went to Spa, and then I went to Dijon and Goodwood and Paul Ricard, and it just spiraled on from there.
Wow, you kind of started at the top too. I mean, and the learning curve.
Massive. And, I think everyone, it's the same with any skill or job, you start at it. And I'd obviously been doing lots of drawings of people and, like I said, drawing on the ship of guys doing different things and lots of little, going to these ops rooms where there were millions of screens and computers and buttons and switches. And so that's kind of similar to the car world, really, where you've got these interesting objects. But looking back now, I'm so grateful that people supported me and liked my style, because it certainly wasn't photographic representation then. My style's always been a little bit quirky. Whimsical is a way that people describe my work. And I look back on the earlier paintings when I didn't know about these cars. I wasn't familiar with their shapes. And I look back sometimes now and think, oh my God, the wheels are so wonky on that painting. Or, that just doesn't look like, I haven't got the back at all correctly. But luckily, art is subjective. And a lot of people, I think, just love the fact that I was out there on location. I was different because I was female. It's it's an obvious observation that there aren't many women in this. There are more nowadays, but certainly painting, it tends to be kind of older guys a lot of the time doing these, very brilliant drawings. But to actually have someone on location, like you say, drawing in front of a crowd was unusual. It still is, actually. And and I've got better, and I now know about these cars. I've had the amazing experiences to actually race and rally some of them as well. So looking back, it's the same with any job. You just get better at it, and I hope I'm still improving every day.
I'm curious to know about the medium you work in. What's your preferred medium, especially since you're painting live in front of a crowd?
I work mainly in 2 or 3 different mediums. I like painting in inks, liquid ink, because the colours are very punchy. They're vibrant. They just jump out at you. Watercolours, not so much until recently. And I also work in oils. But obviously, when you're painting live, although there are artists that paint live in oils, it's a very slow drying process. It's very messy. You need turpentine with you to clean your brushes. So I basically just I have been for many years, just going with a great big box full of liquid ink in bottles. And they're heavy and they can smash in transit and they're a pain. But I like the results. But recently I've started mixing the watercolor and maybe just taking a few inks with me. So I start the process with a sketch in pencil. And if you watch me draw, and I think that's why people like seeing me work, because the sketch is done quite quickly. It's almost like someone is working through my arm. It's amazing how it can happen sometimes. It just feels a bit surreal. I'm sitting there, I'm staring at the car, and I learned very quickly that when you're trying to capture an object and you're being really critical of every mark making, it doesn't work like that, because you've just got to be free and you've got to make mistakes. And my old art teacher at school many years ago told me that to regard a drawing as a series of corrections. And I think a lot of the time when you see people working, they're so critical of themselves and they're doing these tiny marks, quickly rubbing it out and doing another mark and rubbing it out again. And I just, my rubber is basically banned for the first hour or so, because I'm literally just trying to sort of capture the shape. And it doesn't matter if the lines are wonky or, it's a slow process. And then the rubber comes out and the lines get more defined. And then I go in with often a black ink dip pen, a nib that you put into the holder, and then you dip it in a black pot of ink, Indian ink. And that's great, because once that line is there, you can't move it with water once it's dried. Whereas in some mediums, if you go over the colour with a bit of water, it smudges. So the ink is great because it stays fixed. And then I just, add the colour. And it depends. When I first started, it was often just a car on its own on a white background. And that was great, and owners loved them. But I quickly realised that I was limiting myself to one sale. The car owner would buy it and maybe a couple of prints for their mechanics, or maybe, an enthusiast might buy a print or so. But in recent years, I tend to go to the events where I know, like Monaco, is a much more generic scene. You're going to get the Fairmont corner, you're going to get the pool, the swimming pool, or you're going to get the paddock, or the castle, and everyone recognises it as Monaco with the background of all the cranes and the super yachts in the harbour. It's a much more generic image. It will appeal to a lot more people. So that's what I've started doing more now, and I love it.
Yeah, and of course, in addition to that, the commission work just kind of comes to you, right? Whatever you're painting, you attract a lot of interest. So Do you find that you have pressure to get it all done that day, or?
Yeah, I think there was a pressure initially, and I was quicker. But then my paintings weren't as detailed in the early days. So now, for example, this year at the Quail, I started painting a red 275, and I spent most of the day painting that. And the owner came up and just told me he wanted to buy it, so that was good. And then I started painting the winning D-type, but I don't think I even got to paints at that stage. It was just a pencil drawing, and the car moved, and it was gone for quite some time. So then I had to start something else. So I painted a Porsche 356, which is a very cool car. Anyway, that aside, I finished the 356 and the D-type when I was back in London. And the pressure is off. I used to try and do everything all there then, but now I work from photographs. So it's good actually, because a lot of artists, I think, struggle. They're in their studio. They're not really getting out and about unless they're going through a gallery, who of course then take 50%, and they're having to put their hopes and trust in a gallerist who will be selling on their behalf. Whereas although I do paint in my studio on my own, it's really important for me to get out there, and because I'm meeting new people every time I get on that lawn, and sometimes it doesn't really matter to me if the painting I'm actually doing physically there isn't perfect, because as you have seen yourself, it is so difficult to get a perfect painting when you've got thousands of people walking past you, talking to you, taking your business card, moving you, the car moving, it raining suddenly, or getting really cold and your hands get too cold, or it gets too hot and the ink starts drying on your nib of your pen and it actually won't come out of the pen. So there are so many things that can happen due to the atmosphere and the elements. And I just let that go now. And last weekend I went to Chantilly in France for this Concours event. I'd never been before. And back in the day, I'd have taken my sketchbook and my paints and thought, I've got to be here to physically paint and physically work. Otherwise, it's not worth me being here. But I've learned over the years that actually I don't always need to actually be physically painting. I'm there. I've been lucky to have some great articles written about me in various motor magazines. And so people often, when I tell them what I do, they're like, oh my God, I've seen you. I saw you at Spa. Or I saw you, years ago painting at Goodwood. And I'm doing more shows now. I exhibited this year twice, but the Salon Privé in London and Chelsea, and the one recently at Blenheim Palace. And that's the first time I've ever really had a proper stand at an event where I've had all my car paintings framed beautifully up on a wall so people can actually see them. So I think it's just getting out there really, and either painting or talking or exhibiting. It's all valid and worth it.
Yeah, and by the way, you touched on how many people you meet, and isn't it fantastic that you build all these relationships through your work? Of course, we all do that in our professional lives, but it's quite unique with you. And
it's not a bad life. It's it can be challenging. It can be, I mentioned earlier to you, I'm a single parent. I've got a 5-year-old autistic son, so that's challenging, and I can't travel as much as I used to. I used to be able to literally go away the whole time at a drop of a hat, but now I have responsibilities. He has to be in school because of his challenges. It's not very easy to find childcare for him, so I have to be a bit more picky and choosy about where I go, and obviously we've had COVID, and that was a tricky time because I couldn't get anywhere. I couldn't go to any of these car events, which is, predominantly where my income comes from. But I think you just have to adapt. And I was lucky in that I started painting portraits of people's houses or offices or their pubs or their dogs, whatever really gets you through a lockdown. And that was actually, lockdown was one of my busiest years because people, I think, were bored, stuck at home. They couldn't spend their money on travel. They were looking at their houses all the time thinking, right, what could we put on the wall there? They were doing DIY. And so that was really good. And I was meeting a lot of people through Instagram. And I know I speak to a lot of people about social media, and there are so many people that hate it. And I understand that. I don't like it for lots of reasons, but I don't follow people I don't want to see. There's so much fakeness on Instagram, on Facebook, and that doesn't interest me. I follow artists, sculptures, photographers. I follow friends, but if someone's constantly putting out in their life how perfect everything is, I don't want to know, because it's unrealistic. And I like to see the true side of life as well. But of course, Instagram is a fantastic way of getting your work out there, because you can give people a business card, but are they always going to look at your website? Possibly not. But Instagram is a constant, way to update and remind people what you're doing in an interesting way. It's not just about, oh, here's my latest painting. It might be me showing the behind the scenes of my printer and him photographing my work and like color matching and all the stuff that I don't know. I find that really interesting. I like seeing behind the scenes stuff. My framer and choosing the frames or choosing the mounts or whatever. And I think it's nice to see the process rather than just the finished object.
Yeah, I agree. And it gives people an idea of how much really goes into all of this.
Absolutely. I think I think all jobs all creative jobs are interesting. And I love seeing other people's process as well. So during lockdown, although I was painting mainly house portraits, when my son would go for his afternoon nap, he's too old for that now, but at the time, luckily he could for a 2-hour nap every afternoon. So I'd get my camera out and I would be painting with my right hand and holding my camera with my left hand and filming, and I'd be talking about my day, or I'd be talking about, the process or whatever was in my head. And I think a lot of people really loved that because it's quite therapeutic to watch someone work, I think. And I work in a strange way. I mentioned earlier, sometimes I feel like someone's flowing through my hand. It's not that I work on a tiny part of the painting and it just gets bigger and bigger. My eye, for some reason, it's my brain, I think. It's like when I try and do some work in front of my computer, I answer that email, then I jump up and take the laundry out, then I go and make myself a cup of tea, then I have to answer the phone, then I go downstairs for something. I'm not very good at just sitting in one place and doing one job methodically, slowly. I dart all around the place, and it's exactly the same with my paintings. And people talk about this when they see me painting on Instagram. I'll colour in a bit of blue sky up there, then I'll use that blue to paint in the wheel at the bottom, and then I'll put that blue in somebody's hat, and then I'll put it to the left on the tree, and then suddenly I'll change the colour for one tiny bit on the right hand side, and then I'll change the color again. And I don't know why. That's my process. It works for me. It's chaotic and mad, but people seem to find that interesting. And that's where I think social media is so great, because you can't get that through a website. It's just a live update constantly of people's process. And I think that's really good to do.
Horsepower Heritage will be right back after this. Hey, if you're enjoying this episode with Anna-Louise Felstead, check out my interview with artist Nicholas Hunsaker from June 15th. Nicholas has a great vintage lithograph style that captures the spirit of some of the greatest eras in motorsport.
Something that struck me when I read your bio is that your family's immersed in art, has been for many years. And I immediately thought of Ettore Bugatti.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. That was a generational business too. He had car designers and artists in the business. My family, I'm the 4th generation fine artist. In our family, if you say, oh, I'm going to paint for a living, nobody would go, that's a hobby. For other people, if you tell them, oh, I'm getting an art degree, it's like, yeah, good one,
Yeah, get a job,
right? Get a real job. It's a bit like when you have a dynasty or a family of race car drivers. They just kind of end up picking up stuff you don't really know where it comes from, but it's just kind of, oh yeah, of course you do that.
That's my interview with Nicholas Hunsaker from June 15th. And now back to the show. Tell me about some of the relationships you've been able to form through your work. I'm just curious because the car world it's really a small world when you get down to it. I mean,
it is. There are so many that I could talk about. I mean, I've had some amazing clients. Back in, I think it was 2010, I was painting at Pebble, and I was chatting to Frank Stevenson, who...
yes, the designer.
McLaren, yeah. And he was chatting away to me, and Frank, he's great. He can certainly talk, and he's always interesting, but I was aware that there was someone standing behind me who clearly wanted to talk to me, and I was talking to Frank, and I didn't want to be rude, but eventually I sort of had to pull my eyes away, and I was looking at this chap, and he said, excuse me, when you have finished this painting, can you paint my Austro Daimler? And I looked at his name badge, and it was Dr. Wolfgang Porsche. And I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. I'm so excited. I've just been commissioned by Dr. Porsche. So anyway, I painted his car, and he was a real sweetheart. There are different types of clients. They're interested, but then there are other clients like Wolfgang who was so interested in what I was doing, kept coming back, standing over me, staring, quietly making observations, telling me that he liked to do watercolors as well. And then very happy to have his photograph taken with me in the painting in front of the car. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of press there and loads of people started taking photographs. And I got a Christmas card from him that year, which I thought was unbelievably sweet. So, there are people like him. I'm good friends with Greg Whitten, who commissioned me to paint his ERA Romulus, again, around the same kind of time. And he supported me over the years. Bill Marriott bought one of my paintings. And then I've got people who just buy my work and they I meet them at various racetracks. They've allowed me to race their cars. I mentioned earlier I've done the Monte Carlo Rally twice. I've done the Tour Auto once in a TZ. I was doing the road stuff and he was doing the special stages, and that was great to have those kind of experiences and friendships. That's Jason Wright. He was amazing, and I saw him at Goodwood recently. It was lovely to catch up with him, and he met my son. And then, just lots of different people. The Benjafields, which is a group of people who own pre-war Bentleys. I think it's one of the smallest car clubs in the world. And I think you have to be voted onto it. And they have basically adopted me as their mascot. And I went to Monaco Historic with them this year. And they were all staying at the Fairmont. And every day I would stand with them at the top, looking down, painting. And I've done some driving with them at Goodwood with William Metcalf at Vintage Bentley, who was encouraging the younger generation to learn about these beautiful old Bentleys and teach them how to drive them, because they're tricky. The gearboxes are tough and difficult to master. And so many amazing experiences. And I keep meeting new people all the time. Wherever I go, as you said, it is a small world. And I can go to a Concours event now and know a bunch of people. But then those people will always introduce me to somebody else I haven't met before. It's an ever-growing network. And it's amazing.
Tell me about getting your vintage racing license.
So I did it in a slightly cheeky way. Jason, my friend, lives in Italy. And rather than get it in the UK, which is a bit more... it's just a bit trickier and it's a longer process. He basically put me in the Henry Morrow School racing, learning how to drive Formula Fords. So I think I did that for 2, possibly 3 days, which was so much fun. And then after that, I went and saw a doctor in Italy who put this very strange, ancient-looking contraption on my head with all these wires coming out of all over my face and skull, and gave me a bit of a thorough medical. He was quite a hot doctor, actually. He must have been sort of late 60s Italian doctor. He turned up on a motorbike with long grey hair, and he was delicious. Anyway, I had a medical with him, which was quite fun. And after that, I was given a racing license, which possibly isn't the safest way, because my first ever race was at Monza. And I may have spun a couple of times, but then my second race was at Silverstone Classic in the Pre-63 GT race, and I was racing an Alfa Romeo Giulietta Sprint Veloce, and I definitely span, I think, on the first corner and had a Ferrari bread van coming straight for me, which was quite terrifying. There were no crashes, I'm proud to say, but perhaps the slower process with more signatures required and practices is a better way of getting a license, a safer way.
Sounds like fun, though. And you have so many opportunities there in the UK and on the continent for vintage events. Of course, we have a lot here, too. And have you spent much time at Laguna Seca while you've been in California over the years? I mean, that's another great place to capture some wonderful imagery.
I have been to Laguna Seca many times, and I met David McNeil at a party at his house a few years ago when I was there at Pebble Beach, and he's commissioned me to paint a few of his cars now. And he obviously owns WeatherTech now, or owns WeatherTech, which now owns Laguna Seca, the racetrack. So,
right.
So I would like to do some paintings, and that is on my to-do list. This summer has been crazy, though. I mean, not only with sort of taking part in car events, but going to them and painting them and doing the whole parenting thing as well. It's definitely, there's so much to do in the car season. And I actually thought France was going to be my last event, but one of my weekends away in the countryside in the UK was cancelled recently, which means I'm now available for the Zoot Concours in Belgium. And, I'm kind of tempted to do that now, but it's a balance, isn't it? Because you want to take time to recharge and actually go to your studio and paint some new work. But at the moment I'm painting new work, but it tends to be, like I said earlier, kind of just for one client, or if I'm in Monaco, that's different, but because obviously it's a more generic scene. But at these Concours events, it's often just of one car or two cars. So that's all great. And it's all, it's all good to be selling pictures, but I want to be doing much bigger stuff in my studio. I want to be doing new work. I had a meeting today with a company. I'm quite excited about a new project where I'm going to be producing a kind of different line of artwork and having them printed on large light boxes, which will be very cool. And you just have to evolve, and otherwise it would get boring. So it's hard to know how to manage it, but there's always so much to do in the summer. So hopefully the winter time will be a time to kind of reflect a bit and create some new, different stuff.
I was just going to ask, what gets you through the long, cold English winter?
It's really tough, actually. And I tend to have this awful period of a couple of months every year where I just feel like my mojo's gone and I won't get it back ever again. And there's nothing really I can do about it. I just have no desire to work. And it's the most terrifying thing as a creative person, just to feel like you just can't do anything. And I used to have a gallery in Cornwall. And yeah, I remember, in Cornwall in the winter, it is horrific. It's way worse than being in London. And just going and sitting in my friend's sofa, and he had a gallery, and just saying, I just can't do anything. I just can't work. And I think the best thing to do really is go away somewhere hot and get recharged. I used to go to Bali before I had my son, spend 2 or 3 weeks out there painting, and just, I think it's so good to get a bit of vitamin D in. But now I think I've just got to just let it go. Just kind of go with it. No, it's not going to last, but it's tricky.
By the way, for my listeners outside the UK, I should mention that Cornwall is the West Country. It's essentially a long peninsula, and it faces the sea, and it gets the blast of all that cold air and weather, and it's quite a rugged place, isn't it?
Yeah, and I was on the North Coast, so it was very rugged and very dramatic, as opposed to the South Coast, which is lovely sort of sandy beaches or pebble beaches. But yeah, on the North Coast, it's much more rugged, and I found it very. They're both beautiful, but I like the craziness of the dramatic side of the North Coast. But yeah, I lived in New York for a while as well. I did some events out there. I designed the poster for Lime Rock, and that was amazing because I had to sit next to Sterling Moss, who I'd met a bunch of times, but I had to sit next to him every day for a few hours signing my posters. And he and Susie were sitting next to me, and that was really lovely to spend some time with them. And then when I was working for Formula One management out in Singapore, I met Niki Lauda, and Jackie Stewart was great at giving me some advice on presenting, which I realised quite quickly wasn't my forte, but so cool to have met these racing legends.
And by the way, presenting is an extremely difficult job.
I had no idea. And I just think I had to interview Lewis Hamilton on race day morning.
Oh my gosh.
And my boss was like, right, go and interview him. And he walked through and he had a face like thunder. He did not want to be interviewed by someone like me, a brand new person. And it was Toto Wolff actually that made him talk to me because he didn't want to. Good
old Toto. I love Toto.
Yeah. My brother's got a man crush on Toto. I mean, he's just such a good looking guy. But yeah, it was really tricky. And I get it. I completely understand why Lewis on race day morning does not want to have some rookie interviewing him. I get it. And I didn't want to either. I was like, you just do your thing. But of course they have to. It's their job. And I'm just, I think you have to have a certain type of personality to be a journalist, and I'm a bit too soft and a bit too embarrassed and wary of upsetting people and treading on their toes. And so I just realized that as much as I loved being in that environment, and it was so glamorous and exciting, and to be part of that traveling circus in a way, I just wasn't able to do it. They gave me a piece of paper where I had to talk about the fact we were in Singapore during the World Championships, and they had this many light bulbs on the track, and it took this much power to generate, and this was going on, and I thought, okay, I can kind of say that, and I had to stand in front of all these cars in the paddock being prepared for, I think it was practice day or possibly even qualifying, and the wind blew my hair in my face, and I was nervous. I unwittingly kept holding the microphone in front of my mouth so the camera couldn't lip read. And they kept saying, Ale, lower it down. So I was trying to remember that. And then the wind was blowing, and then the cars were noisy. And then I forgot. I kept saying we were at the Grand Prix. And they said, no, it's the World Championship. You've got to say World Champion, not the Grand Prix. So I was getting that wrong. And every time we did a retake, and they've got the cameraman, the sound person, the girl who was in charge of me. It was a team of people. And I was just getting more and more panicked. And in the end, I think I probably had a panic attack. I literally had to sit down with my head between my knees, and they took pity on me. It was the first time I'd ever done it. And the guys bent the paper and sort of held it under the camera. And I basically just stood and read it. And I was so mortified because I felt like I'd let them down. And actually it looked okay. It was luckily not live. Thank God. I would have died if it had been live. They edited it and it was all on the FOM app. And it looked okay. But yeah, I was never asked back again. And it does not surprise me.
You know what? I have a feeling, though, that all of those bugs would have been worked out and you would have done just fine in the long run.
I don't know. I mean, that's where Jackie Stewart was so lovely, because he and I had a long conversation. And Lee McKenzie as well was really sweet. And so was Will Buxton. This was all during Singapore. And everyone was giving me so much advice and telling me not to stress. But a lot of, I think it was Natalie Pinkham. She took it takes everyone a long time to learn their trade. And I'm sure, like I said about my paintings back in the early days, everyone improves. Thank God we do. But you have to start somewhere. But it's, I would love to be involved in more. I don't know how. I said that in my recent Octane interview. I love the car world. And as my son grows up, and maybe he can come to some events with me. I mean, he came to Good Revival with me the other weekend, and it was slightly stressful because noise is, we talked about sensory overload earlier. And for him as an autistic child, he had to wear ear defenders. He wanted me to carry him, and he's quite heavy. It was tricky. But as he gets older, I really want to introduce him to all this stuff, because I think it's fascinating. And you can, even if it doesn't become a career, what a passion to be involved in. It makes me quite emotional even thinking about it, because I have met the most amazing people, different people who give me the most fantastic experiences. I mean, my friend Jason, not only did he let me drive, in the Monte Carlo Rally, he sent me off to Finland to do the Porsche Camp 4 ice driving course. I mean, it's one of the best experiences of my life. And having those opportunities, that's what life's all about. I'm so grateful that I'm not behind the same desk every day doing the same thing. And of course, it's a risk. Of course, you don't know where your next paycheck's coming in from. There are some months where I really struggle and think, oh my God, this is tough. And then I have an experience and think, yeah, but it's worth it, because, it's almost like being bipolar, I guess. You get really tough times, and then really exhilarating, amazing times. And that to me, I'd rather have that than anything else.
I think that is part and parcel of the creative world in general. It doesn't matter what you're doing, those highs and lows, and also that uncertainty, but it's exciting.
Well, I've got friends who live for their holidays. All they want to do when they come back from their holiday, they'll post something on Instagram about, struggling, post-holiday blues, looking forward to the next trip. And I always look at these posts and think that's so sad, because when I come back from holiday, I'm excited. I'm excited to come home. I'm excited about the next. And listen, I'm not pretending that everything is always rosy in my life. It definitely isn't. But I just love the fact that I just think you have to just say yes to stuff. And I do things all the time that I don't want to do. And often when you do them and you put yourself out there, it ends up being a really good experience. So not always. I've had times when I've gone out in the evenings to a party, for example, and thought, oh God, why did I bother? This is such a boring night or whatever. But that doesn't happen very often. I went to the Royal Automobile Club recently for Derek Bell's 80th birthday party. There was a dinner organised for him, and Jackie Ickx was there, and he stood up, and all these old racing drivers, all very famous, were all talking and telling stories. And Justin Bell was interviewing his dad, and they were talking about Steve McQueen and how he was on set. And it was just fascinating to hear these stories of old, that you say that you're interested in all the historic side. And I am too, because I was, watching these old movies, like it's not an old movie, but the movie Into the Forest, and listening to these chats between Derek talking about his experiences and how he was given a car here, there, and all these different drives he was given. I find that truly fascinating. And obviously we talk about the F1 world and the modern supercar world, and I know a bunch of guys who own Koenigsegg's, and I've been on supercar rallies with them, and it's just a different animal, isn't it? And I'm not one of these people that can look at a modern Pagani and tell you what it is, but I know much more about an old Bugatti. I love the pre-war era personally. But at the same time, I find it both interesting. And I've been watching that program on Netflix, the Drive to Survive, and I found that equally, fascinating as well. So it's just such a huge area, and I could never. I'm not one of these people that can just absorb information and retain it, sadly. But I find it very entertaining when I'm listening to these stories. So yeah, I need to try and capture it all in some stage throughout my career.
Well, fortunately, you're never going to run out of material, Anna-Louise. I mean,
No.
it's infinite, and that's exciting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you've seen my naughty car pictures. Have you seen those?
Naughty car pictures. No. Do tell.
So when I was at Pebble Beach back in, I think it was 2010, I was used to people coming up and saying, can you paint my car? But this one particular guy asked me to paint his Aston Martin. I said, yeah, that's fine. He said, well, can I send you a picture of a girl who I want you to include in the picture, but don't be offended because she's, of her attire. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, her clothes are a little bit risque. We're kind of into bondage. I was like, oh God. He said, so if you can give the painting a bit of a bondage theme, that would be great. So I go back to London and he sent me a picture of his car and this girl, and I'm sketching them out. And I think, I'll make it a bit risque. He likes bondage. So I did a little drawing of a guy whipping a girl over the bonnet of the car with a whip.
Now, this is a family show, my friend.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. Yeah, please continue.
So he said, can you please change the whip to a paddle? And then we're good. And I thought, I don't know. Actually, I do not know what a paddle is. So I go onto Google, type in bondage paddle. Oh, okay, I get it. I said paddle. So I draw the paddle, change it. Anyway, I did the finished picture and I sent it to him. He's like, oh my God, AL, what are you thinking? I can't hang that in my office. It's like, you asked me for a bondage painting. This is what I've done. Anyway, he loved it. I don't think it went in his office. I think it went in the downstairs loo. But
it went into the dungeon.
Yeah, somewhere like that. So as it happened at the time, I posted the picture on Facebook and tagged a bunch of my car friends, car dealers, car collectors, racing drivers. And it kind of went crazy. And the next thing is I'm being commissioned to paint all these cars with girls washing them and parties with girls and guys kissing and eating pizza. And I mean, just so silly. And one of my most popular ones is of a Bentley that Simon Kidston commissioned. And another one of a Land Rover, a shooting scene back in the UK with your Dubarry and your Hunter Wellington boots and your shooting, your gun dogs and shooting, stuff all around the car. So yeah, check them out. They're quite fun, and they do very well as prints. But that's another little world that I dabble in. And they are at Salon Privé. I didn't put any on the wall. I thought, no, they're a bit too risque. And like you say, there are going to be family members walking around. So I just put them in my browser. And this is at Chelsea, and they were pretty much the only prints that sold. So for the second one, I put them on the wall, and it's great because they just make people laugh. They're just a bit of fun.
Yeah. Well, it's a very titillating story. So AL, if people want to get in touch with you, look at your work, what are your coordinates?
My website is alfelstead.com, and that's a good place to see not just my car paintings, but my abstracts, my paintings of Cornwall when I lived there and had my gallery. I've got scenes from backstage at London Fashion Week, all sorts of interesting paintings from all over. But I think the best way to keep in touch and see what I'm up to is via Instagram, because I'm always uploading stories and reels. And I know this is a car show and your listeners will be interested in that, but there's so much other stuff that I do. And I think it's a good way of keeping in touch, really.
Yeah, for sure. Your range is much wider than just classic cars. And if people want to get in touch with you, maybe have a commission of their own automobile, they can do that through the website?
Absolutely. Yeah. People contact me all the time, either through Instagram or the website. And I just ask for really good quality, high resolution photographs that I can paint from. And I can either do a very sensible one or a slightly risque one, down to personal preference.
Well, the mind reels. Anna-Louise Felstead, thank you so much. Your work is delightful. It was great meeting you at Pebble Beach, and I look forward to seeing you once again.
That's so kind. I look forward to it too. I'll definitely see you there next year.
I'll buy you another hot black coffee.
Oh, thank you. That was amazing. It was pretty cold that day.
You were shivering a bit, yeah, and you were telling me that your hands were starting to go a bit numb, so it was the least I could do.
That's very kind. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Don't forget to click that follow button, leave me 5 stars, and a quick review. I'll see you back here on Wednesday, October 19th for kind of a crossover episode with Harry Fipers, host of the Ignition podcast. So until then, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.